The regular session of the 17th Congress is hereby called to order. Senator Gregorio Honasan will lead the chamber in prayer.
Thank you, Mr. President, for waiting. Lord, please grant us productive time filled with purpose in our work and in our lives. Give us enough energy in spirit, mind, and body to continue the tasks you have set before us. In our moments of weakness and strength, sadness and joy, make us feel your presence, that we may persevere and promote harmony in our homes, safety in our communities, unity and order among our leaders and people, inclusive growth for the nation, and security in our shores. Amen.
Amen. The Secretary will please call the roll.
Roll call of members. The Honorable Senators Angara, Aquino, Binay, De Lima, Drilon, Ejercito, Escudero, Gatchalian, Gordon, Onasan, Ontiveros, Lacson, Legarda, Pacquiao, Pangilinan, Pimentel, Poe, Recto, Trillanes, Villanueva, Villar, Zubiri, Senate President Soto III.
With 15 senators present, the chair presence of a quorum. The Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I move that we dispense with the reading of the journal of the 8th session, Tuesday, August 7, and consider the same as approved.
Any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
May reference of business, but
Yes.
I move that we proceed with the reference of business, sir.
The Secretary will proceed with the reference of business.
Reference of business. Resolutions. PS Resolution Number 824 entitled Resolution Congratulating and Commending the University of the Philippines Singing Ambassadors for winning major prizes in the 64th International Habaneras and Polyphony Competition on Torrevieja, Spain, and in the Sing Berlin International Choir Festival and Competition at Berlin, Germany, introduced by Senator Maria Lourdes Nancy S. Binay.
Referred to the Committee on Rules.
PS Resolution Number 825 entitled Resolution Directing the Proper Senate Committees to Conduct an Inquiry in aid of legislation on the utilization of inland waterway transport and the rehabilitation of the Pasig River Ferry Service, introduced by Senator Maria Lourdes Nancy S. Binay.
Referred to the Committee on Public Services.
Committee reports. Committee Report Number 415, submitted jointly by the Committees on Public Services and Finance on House Number 6155, introduced by Representative Razada et al., entitled An Act Converting the Land Transportation Office, LTO Extension Office located in Lapu-Lapu City, Province of Cebu, and the regular LTO District Office and appropriating funds therefore, recommending its approval without amendment.
To the calendar for ordinary business.
Committee Report Number 416, submitted jointly by the Committees on Public Services and Finance on House Number 1924, introduced by Representative Salimbangon et al., entitled An Act Converting the Land Transportation Office, Medellin Extension Office into a regular district office and appropriating funds therefore, recommending its approval without amendment, sponsor Senator Grace Poe.
To the calendar for ordinary business.
Committee Report Number 417, submitted jointly by the Committees on Public Services and Finance on House Number 5955, introduced by Representative Abueg et al., entitled An Act Establishing an Extension Office of the Land Transportation Office, LTO, in the Municipality of Nara, Province of Palawan, and appropriating funds therefore, recommending its approval without amendment, sponsor Senator Grace Poe.
To the calendar for ordinary business.
Committee Report Number 418, submitted jointly by the Committees on Public Services, Finance on House Number 5953, introduced by Representative Alvarez M. et al., entitled An Act Establishing a Land Transportation Office, LTO District Office in the City of Sipalay, Province of Negros Occidental, and appropriating funds therefore, recommending its approval without amendment, sponsor Senator Grace Poe.
To the calendar for ordinary business.
Committee Report Number 419, submitted jointly by the Committees on Public Services and Finance on House Number 5568, introduced by Representative Bravo M.V. et al., entitled, An Act Establishing a Land Transportation Office, LTO Satellite Office in Ticao Island, Province of Masbate, and appropriating funds therefore, recommending its approval without amendment, sponsor Senator Grace Poe.
To the calendar for ordinary business.
Committee Report Number 420, submitted by the Committee on Public Services on House Number 5665, introduced by Representative Almonte et al., entitled, An Act Granting the Malindang Broadcasting Network Corporation a franchise to construct, install, establish, operate, and maintain radio and television broadcasting stations in Mindanao, recommending its approval with amendments, sponsor Senator Grace Poe.
To the calendar for ordinary business.
Committee Report Number 421, submitted by the Committee on Public Services on House Number 6165, introduced by Representative Treñas et al., entitled, An Act Granting the Deus Amor S. Broadcasting, Inc. a franchise to construct, install, establish, operate, and maintain radio and television broadcasting stations in the Philippines, recommending its approval with amendments, sponsor Senator Grace Poe.
To the calendar for ordinary business. The session is suspended. Ratification lang. Hindi nominal yun, no? Hindi nominal voting.
Yeah, we'll just have to read it for the record.
Session is resumed.
Yes, Mr. President, before we move to other official business, we'd like to recognize Congressman Joaquin M. Chipec of the 2nd District of Laguna, who's here with us, together with Chief of Staff Jason Macahia. And,
Welcome to the Senate.
And I believe we have students also from Statefield School, grade 12 students who are here also joining us for today's session. Thank you. And Mr. President, we have with us the bicameral report, conference committee report on the disagreeing provisions on House Bill number 6031, entitled An Act Mandating the Integration of the Maasin City College into the Southern Latest State SLSU, State University, and appropriating funds thereof. I move to consider the said bicameral committee report. I so move, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? Hearing none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, I move that we recognize the distinguished chairman of the Senate panel, Senator Chis Escudero, for his sponsorship remarks on the said report.
Senator Escudero is
Thank you,
recognized.
Mr. President. Mr. President, I have the honor to present the bicameral conference committee on the disagreeing provisions of House Bill number 6031 in relation to the Senate version pertaining to the same House bill. May I ask, Mr. President, that the joint explanation be inserted into the records and made an integral part thereof. So move, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? Chair hears none, motion is approved.
May I ask, Mr. President, through the Majority Leader, for us to adopt the bicameral conference committee report on House Bill number 6031.
Majority Leader.
Yes, Mr. President, I move to adopt and ratify the bicameral conference committee report on the disagreeing votes on House Bill number 6031.
Is there any objection? Hearing none, motion is approved.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, we are in receipt of the bicameral conference committee report on the disagreeing votes on House Bill number 6203, an act converting Sorsogon State College into a state university. into the Sorsogon State University. I move that the said bicameral committee report be considered.
Is there any objection? Hearing none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, I move to recognize the chairman of the Senate panel, Senator Chis Escudero, to sponsor the measure.
Senator Escudero is again recognized for this purpose.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, we have the honor to present the bicameral conference committee report on the disagreeing provisions of House Bill number 6203, as well as the Senate version of House Bill number 6203. The principal difference, Mr. President, is that we are reverting the name to Sorsogon State University in lieu of the proposed amendment to name it after my father, Mr. President. May I ask that the joint explanation of the bicameral conference committee report be inserted into the records and made an integral part thereof? So moved, Mr. President.
Majority Leader,
Yes, Mr. President, I so move to adopt and ratify.
is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Thank you. Congratulations to the said sponsor. Mr. President, we have here classmates of Senator Joel Villanueva, alumni of Maricil School in Valenzuela. There, I believe.
Welcome to the Senate.
No, sir, not classmates from classmates. Mr. President, may I ask for a 1-minute suspension?
Before the minute suspension, where is the classmate?
Sir?
Where is the classmate?
From his school, I believe.
Yes.
Not from
Thank
the
you.
school that you go to, Mr. President.
Or
Thank you, sir.
Senator Angara, you meant.
Yes, sir.
Session is suspended.
So minus one.
Ready to issue, Mr. President.
Session is resumed.
Mr. President, I move to transfer from the calendar of ordinary business of special order Senate Bill number 178 under committee report number 147. I so moved.
Is there any objection? Chair hears none, motion is approved.
I believe my apologies, Mr. President, I believe this was already sponsored. So I move to consider, rather, Senate Bill number 178 under Committee Report number 147 to resume consideration. So
Is there any objection? Chair hears none. Motion is approved.
Mr. President, the measure is in the period of interpellation. We'd like to recognize Senator Chis Escudero to sponsor the measure, and I believe Senator Frank Drilon would like to propound some questions. So moved.
Senator Escudero is recognized to sponsor the measure, and the Minority Leader, Senator Drilon, is recognized to propound some questions. Session is suspended for a minute.
Sabi nito, okay ka daw. So, local bills. Okay.
Ang gusto ko naman talaga yung local.
Wala.
Finding the agenda for today.
Ang agenda dito. Ito, tanggalin mo na ito. Wala na ata ito. Di ba?
Mr. President, ready to resume.
Session is resumed.
Ano to? Naano mo na? Mr. President, I would like to resume consideration. I would like to resume consideration on House Bill number 6065 and the committee report number 225. I so move, Mr. President.
Session suspended. What happened to the one of Chief?
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. President. We withdraw.
Okay. Session is resumed.
Yes, Mr. President, my apologies. I completely forgot there was another item on board. May I move to suspend Senate Bill number, consideration Senate Bill number 178. I so move, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? Chair hears none. Motion's approved.
Mr. President, I'd like to go back to my previous motion to resume consideration on House Bill number 6065.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion's approved.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, this is the act renaming Naval State University, Mr. President Naval, as the Biliran Province State University. The status of this measure is in the period of interpellation. There being no members who will interpolate the measure. May I move to close the period of interpellation, Mr. President?
Is there any objection? There being none, motion's approved.
Mr. President, we move to open the period of amendments.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion's approved.
Mr. President, I'd like to recognize good sponsor, Senator Escudero, if there are any amendments.
Thank you, Mr.
Senator
President.
Escudero is recognized.
We only have one proposed amendment on House Bill number 6065, Mr. President, an omnibus amendment on the acronym BILSU found in sections 1 and 3 of the bill, as well as in the title of the bill, to change the letter PL rather to the letter P. The acronym for Biliran Province State University shall now be read as BIPSU or BIPSU instead of BILSU, BILSU. I so move, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion's approved.
No further amendments, Mr. President.
Majority Leader,
Yes, Mr. President, move to close the period of amendments.
is there any objection? There being none, motion's approved.
Mr. President, I move to approve on second reading House Bill number 6065. So moved.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion's approved.
Mr. President, move to suspend consideration House Bill number 6065.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion's approved.
Mr. President, I move to resume consideration rather, House Bill number 6715.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, this is an act separating Southern Philippines Agricultural Business, Marine and Aquatic Schools of Technology in Digos City, Digos, Davao del Sur. The status of this measure is it's on the period of interpellation. No members want to interpellate. Further, Mr. President, I move to close the period of interpellation.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, I move that we proceed to the period of amendments. I so move, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
I'd like to recognize the good gentleman from Sorsogon.
Thank you, Mr. President. May we propose the following amendments, Mr. President. Number 1, on page 6, line 19, after the phrase "deserving students," add the phrase "quote, in accordance with the provisions of Republic Act number 10931 or the Universal Access to Quality Tertiary Education Act." I so move, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
On page 8, lines 9 to 10, delete the phrase "quote, subject to the rules and regulations of the Commission on Audit," and the following comma. I so move, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
On page 11, lines 2 to 6, delete everything after quote SPAMAST, close quotations on line 2, until quote SPAMAST, close quotations on line 6, and in lieu thereof insert the following. shall serve as the officer in charge of the college pending the appointment of the first college president. So moved, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
On the same page, line 67, delete the phrase, quote, before the expiration of the term of office of the incumbent president of the college, and in lieu thereof insert, quote, from the date of approval of this act. I so move, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
On page 11, line 16, delete the phrase, quote, or the OIC. I so move, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
On page 16, line 23, after the word status and before the period, insert the phrase, quote, based on said memorandum order number 46, series of 2012. I so move, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Delete lines 24 to 27 on page 16 and lines 1 to 8 on page 17. I so move, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
On page 17, line 10, after the word act, delete the comma and the phrase unless in the meantime, open close quotation, and in lieu thereof insert the word until. I so move, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
On the same page, line 11, after the word therein, delete the comma and the phrase within a period not exceeding January 31, 2021. I so move, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
No further amendments, Mr. President.
Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I move to close the period of amendments. I so move, Mr.
Is
President.
there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, I move to approve on second readings House Bill number 6715. I so move.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, I move to suspend consideration of the said bill.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Thank you, Mr. President. May I ask for 1 minute suspension?
Session suspended.
Ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session is resumed.
Mr. President, I move to resume consideration on House Bill number 990 under Committee Report number 369. I so move, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, this is an act separating the city of Calamba from the second legislative district of the province of Laguna to constitute the lone legislative district of the city of Calamba. Mr. President, I move that we recognize the distinguished gentleman from Aurora, Mr. President.
Senator Angara is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Majority Leader, no member of the Senate has signified their intention to propose to propose questions. I move that we close the period of interpellation and debate.
Mr. President, before we move to close, may I ask the sponsor if I could be made a co-sponsor of this measure?
Of course, it would be an honor, Mr.
Thank you,
President.
Mr.
Thank you, Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I move to close the period of interpellation.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, I move to open the period of amendments.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
We'd like to ask the sponsor if there are amendments.
Thank you, Majority Leader, Mr. President. With the permission of the body, we have 2 amendments. The first is on page 1, line 6, after section 2, to delete the current title, which says incumbent representative, and in lieu thereof, to insert the words holdover as the new section title. So move.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, the second amendment is on page 1, line 8, after the word until, to delete the phrase the expiration of the term of office, and in lieu thereof, to insert the phrase the new representative shall have been duly elected and qualified. I so move.
Is there any objections? There being none, motion is approved.
No other amendments, Mr. President. Move to close.
Mr. President, we move to close the period of amendments.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, I move to approve on second reading House Bill number 990. I so move, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, I move to suspend consideration of the said bill.
Thank you, Majority Leader. Thank you, Mr. President, to our colleagues and to the gentleman from Sorsogon for giving way. Thank you.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I move to resume consideration on House Bill number 6741. I so move, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
The status of this measure, Mr. President, is in the period of interpellation. No member signified its intention to interpellate. I move to close the period of amendment. Period of interpellation, rather.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, I move to open the period of amendments and recognize the good sponsor for his amendments.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved. Senator Escudero is once again recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Majority Leader. May we propose the following amendments, Mr. President? On page 11, lines 1 to 2, remove the phrase "quote" if qualified. I so move, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
On page 11, line 10, delete the phrase "quote" of the university within 6 months from the date of vacancy and the comma after the phrase "officer in charge OIC." I so move, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
On page 11, line 11, insert the phrase "quote" of the university after the word "president."
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
On page 11, lines 11 to 12, section 10, replace the sentence "quote, the successor or the OIC shall serve only for the unexpired portion of the term" with the phrase "quote, within 6 months from the date of vacancy, the board shall constitute a search committee for the presidency. I so move, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
On page 11, between lines 12 and 13, insert a new paragraph to read as follows. In case of vacancy in the office of the President, as mentioned in the immediately preceding paragraph, his successor shall hold office for the unexpired term. I so move, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
On page 13, lines 26 to 27, delete the phrase "including those of the Extension Campus in the municipality of Cabasalan in the province of Zamboanga, Sibugay," and the comma thereafter. I so move, Mr.
Is there
President.
any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
On page 14, lines 6 to 7, delete the phrase "quote" and its campuses and extension centers. I so move, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Last amendment, on page 16, line 12, replace the colon with a period before the word "provided", then delete the sentences starting from the word "provided" on the same line up to line 27 and lines 1 to 13 on page 17. I so move, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
No further amendments, Mr. President.
Majority
President?
Leader.
I move to close the period of amendments.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, I move to approve on second reading House Bill number 6741. I so move.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, I move to suspend consideration of House Bill number 6741.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, I move to resume consideration House Bill number 6995.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
The status is, it's in the period of interpellation. No member has signified to interpolate. I move to close the period of interpellation.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, I move to open the period of amendments.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, I move to recognize the good sponsor for his amendment.
Mr. President, we have no amendments for this bill as well as with the subsequent House bill seeking to create and/or separate high schools and/or elementary schools that will be discussed this afternoon and are in the agenda. Neither did any member register to interpolate on the said measures. So may I ask the Majority Leader for the subsequent bills as well to close not only the period of interpolation but as well as the period of amendments, since there are no amendments
Okay.
for these bills. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I move that we,
One by one.
one by one, of course. Are we in 674? 674.
on 6995.
699. Mr. President, I move that we approve on second reading House Bill number 6995. I so move. Mr.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, I move to suspend consideration House Bill number
Is there any
6995.
objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, I move that we resume consideration House Bill number 7175.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, there being no members to interpolate, I move to close the period of interpolation.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, I move that we open the period of amendments. Mr. President.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
There being no amendments by both committee and individual, we move to close the period of amendments.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, I move to approve on second reading House Bill number 7175.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President. Mr. President, I move to resume, suspend consideration of the said bill.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, I move to resume consideration House Bill number 7176.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, there being no members to interpolate, move to close the period of interpolation.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, I move to open the period of amendments.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
There being no individual and committee amendments, we move to close the
Is
period.
there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, we
Motion
move
is
to-
approved.
Motion to approve on second reading, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, I move to suspend consideration House Bill number 7176.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, I move that we suspend consideration of the said bill.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, I move that we resume consideration House Bill number 7177.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, I move to close the period of interpellation.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, I move also to close the period, open the period of amendments, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
There being no amendments, we move to close the period of
Is
amendments.
there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, I move to approve on second reading House Bill number 7177.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, I move to suspend consideration of the said measure.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, I move to resume consideration of House Bill number 7178.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, I move to close the period of interpellations, there being no interpellators.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, I move to open the period of amendments.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, I move to close the period of amendments, being now amendments.
Who is the sponsor of this measure?
Senator Escudero, Mr. President, is making us do a lot of work today.
I suggest that he stand in the podium.
Yes, sir. I can do that for you. Stand in the podium now. Yes, sir.
Is there
Mr.
any
President.
objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, I move to to approve on second reading House Bill number 7178.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, I move to suspend consideration of the
Is
Senate.
there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, I move that we resume consideration of House Bill number 7240. I so move, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, I move to close the period of interpellation.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, I move to open the period of amendments.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
There being no amendments, Mr. President, I move to close the period of amendments.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, I move to approve on second reading House Bill number 7240. I so move.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, I move to suspend consideration of the said bill.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, I move that we resume consideration House Bill number 7241. I so move, Mr.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, there being no interpellators, I move to close the period of interpellation.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, I move to open the period of amendments.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, I move to close the period of amendments. if
Motion is
there are no
approved.
amendments. Mr. President, I move to approve on second reading House Bill number 7241.
Any objections? There being none, motion is approved.
I move to suspend consideration of the said measure.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, I move that we resume consideration of House Bill number 7242.
7243?
7242, sir.
42, okay. Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, I move to close the period of interpellation.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, I move to open the period of amendments.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, there being no
No
amendments, we close the period of amendments, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, I move to approve on second reading House Bill number 7242. I so move.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, I move to suspend consideration.
Is
of the
there
said
any
bill.
objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Lastly, on our local bills, I move to resume consideration, Mr. President, House Bill number 7243.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, I move to close the period of interpellation.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, I move to open the period of amendments.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, I move to close the period of amendments.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, I move to approve on second reading House Bill number 7243. I so move, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
I move to suspend consideration on the said measures.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Before we can take a 5-minute restroom break, Mr. President. Mr. President, just some housekeeping matters. After our Committee on Rules hearing today, I move, when we come out with the consensus, Mr. President, I move to refer PS Resolution number 760 primarily to the Committee on Accountability of Public Officers and Investigations, and secondarily to the Committee on Civil Service, Government Reorganization, and Professional Regulation. I so move, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
May we have a 1 minute suspension?
Session is suspended.
Thank you, boss.
Dami, ah. Penta.
Guys, Senator Lauren nandyan. Tapos Senator Lauren. I asked Dudik. Okay. Ready to resume, Mr. President?
Session is resumed.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I move to resume consideration of Senate Bill number 1753. I so move.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
This is the bill on the SSS, and we are still in the period of interpellation. We'd like to recognize the sponsor, Senator Richard Gordon, and to interpolate our distinguished minority floor leader, Senator Frank Dillon.
Senator Dillon, the minority leader, is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Will the good sponsor continue to yield the floor for a few?
Of course, Mr. Chairman. Of course, Mr. President.
Mr. President, with your indulgence and the indulgence of the sponsor, we would just like to revisit for a short period of time the issue of the joint and several liabilities of the shipping companies as employers of sea-based OFWs and the manning agencies as agents of the shipping companies. This is found on page 6, line 17 to line 20, Mr. Sponsor. During the last session, you, the sponsor, asserted that upon our question, that the manning agency is jointly and severally liable with the shipping agencies for violations of the Social Security Act. And to the question that we asked as to whether the joint and joint and solidary liability would include criminal liability, the response was yes, it would include. So that even if it's a legal fiction created, that the money agency becomes the agent of the shipping company, he is also made criminally liable on the basis of the interpretation of line 17 to 20 on page 6 of the bill. Mr. President, in our industry today, the shipping industry, there are two systems of remittances of salaries, There are two systems. One system is the remittance is a situation where the money agency does payrolling service, meaning that the sums are remitted by the shipping company to the shipping money agent, and the money agent would be the one to pay the salary of the overseas of the sea-based overseas Filipino worker, and remit the salary also of the the entitlement of the family, usually 75%, and also remits to the SSS the contributions of both the overseas Filipino worker and the shipping company. Now, the other system is where the shipping or the money agency only performs the service of manning the vessel for a fee, and afterwards it is the vessel who remits the salaries to the family and to the Social Security premium, if that is decreed. So on this instance, the law would also require solidary liability. The issue that bothers us, Mr. President, we have no problem with a joint and solidary liability for the civil aspect, meaning whether or not the money agency performs payroll services. When it comes to liability for the civil aspect, he should be jointly and severally liable. But on the criminal aspect, Mr. Sponsor, I find difficulty accepting the proposition that the money agency can be found criminally liable for the failure to remit the SSS premium unless the money agency conspires with the shipping agency or violates the provisions of this act either intentionally or through negligence. In other words, there must be an act attributable to the money agency before he becomes criminally liable. Insofar as his criminal liability is concerned, insofar as the civil liability is concerned, we fully endorse we have no problem and fully endorse the concept that he is solidarily liable on the civil aspect. So would the good sponsor consider spreading into the record, if they agree with this, that it should be civil, that the joint and solidary liability should only be limited to the civil aspect?
Your Honor, I find no disagreement with the proposition of the good gentleman, although there is a Supreme Court decision that says that there's no impediment for filing a criminal complaint against the petitioner in the case of Ben Santanita versus Court of Appeals for his failure. And this is a shipping manning agent. However, Mr. President, I agree with the gentleman, the good minority floor leader, that it is kind of harsh that they'll have to have criminal liability when he's really acting as an agent, unless, as the good minority floor leader has said, that there's a collusion in terms of cheating the employee. And so, Mr. President, I consulted the SSS and they find that this is not a deal breaker, they're willing to say, take out the criminal liability because they find it too harsh.
Yes, and equity and fairness would dictate
That's correct.
that
Yes.
while he is civilly liable, he should not be criminally liable unless he commits separate acts of collusion and other acts which will show that he had participation.
Subject, of course, to those exceptions, Your Honor.
Yes,
Collusion, participation,
Yes,
attempt to really
Yes.
thwart the provisions, Your Honor.
yes. So I'm glad that that is acceptable to the sponsor. Now, on page 7 and 8, on page 7, the lines 10 to 13, can we have the explanation on the record? What exactly does this mean? This on page 7, sir.
Provided that,
Line,
the one?
line 10 to 13.
provided that in countries which already give social security to Filipinos, the DFA through the Philippine embassies, and it only shall determine the feasibility of negotiating further agreements that will serve the best interests of the OFWs.
What does this mean, sir?
Your Honor, I believe there are some foreign countries, especially in Europe, the host country provide SSS benefits to the Filipinos who are working there, Your Honor. That's the only thrust of this provision, Your Honor. It applies to those, but certainly there's nothing wrong with trying to get
Yes.
more benefits for the OFWs. And I guess the decision there would, which is more beneficial, the one where the employee is getting a liberal dose of Social Security, or whether it's the Philippine side that will provide him with a liberal dose of, as you say, of Social Security, or maybe even both.
You know, this provision or this particular sentence or lines do not impose any obligation on the Philippine Embassy, on the Department of Labor. It simply says, shall determine the feasibility of negotiating further agreements. I mean, maybe at the appropriate time, we can clarify what this exactly means, because it doesn't mean anything at this point when you read it.
Well, it's just a heuristic notion on the part of the labor representatives of the country to try and get better terms. Although, as I said, if the European community or whatever it is, whatever country is that is already providing for a more liberal terms to our people, there's nothing wrong with that. But,
Okay, yes.
as far as
All
I'm
right.
concerned, Your Honor.
All right. Anyway, I just wanted to place that on the record. Now, on page 8, lines 12 to 20, okay, there is mention here of the memo of the Executive Secretary dated February 22, 2017, which granted an additional monthly benefit allowance of 1,000 for retirement, disability, and death pensioners effective January 2017. Now, is it correct that under this memorandum, there is also an additional 1,000 pesos per month to be given in 2022 or earlier?
No, Your Honor, we're not, there's no intention. In fact, it will now be the Commission who will now determine whether additional compensation, which is appropriate depending on the financial condition of the SSS, Your Honor.
Yes, that is, I understand it. That is now the Commission. But can we have a copy of this memorandum of the Executive Secretary dated 22 February 2017?
Yes, Your Honor. I remember I have a copy here. I remember there was that statement and that the 1,000 pesos was given, which required us to be more urgent in our task of
Yes.
passing this bill. if I remember correctly, let me just consult just for 30 seconds, Your Honor.
Yeah.
30-second break.
1 second, 1 minute suspension, Mr. President.
Session is suspended.
Wala sinasabi.
Right to proceed, Your Honor.
Session is resumed.
Your Honor, here, I believe, can the page please hand a copy to the distinguished minority party? Meron ba yan doon? Wala yun doon. That was the original proposal was by the President was to be kind to the folks because, you know, the pension on the average is about 4,000, so they decided to add another 1,000. Now, if you add another 1,000, that would no longer be realistic, Your Honor. So that's why the additional benefit stated here on 22 February 2017 is where it stops, unless the SSS finds itself in better times. The intention of the President to grant additional will become moot and academic now because it will now depend on the SSS whether to grant additional benefits to the beneficiaries.
Yes, sir, okay. But just for the record, what the gentleman handed to this representation is a memo of the Executive Secretary dated January 24, 2018. What is referred to in the bill that we were debating on page 8, line 13, is a memo of the Executive Secretary dated 22 February 2017.
I mean, it's suspension.
Session is suspended.
I will not trust you anymore. Babasahin ko muna, babasahin ko. Ito may memorandum. I think we have it now, Your Honor. Wala na? May copy ako sa office. Just 1,000. There's no more 1,000 to the
Kinopyahan yan eh. Hindi po pwedeng...
yes. 1,000. Okay. Ready to resume, Your Honor.
Session is resumed.
The original intent of the President was to give this 1,000 pesos, and then they were going to come up with a 10-point plan where they were going to increase it. But after a study, I'm told that the President left it to the SSS and to the provisions of this bill to see to it that the better judgment rule or the good faith judgment of the SSS will prevail, Your Honor.
All right, I will leave that in the meantime, but I am certain that I have read in one of the papers that, or one of the papers that reference materials that I had, that the memo contains
An additional.
1,000, because you recall, Mr. Sponsor, that the demand was for 2,000.
Yes, Your Honor.
Monthly pension. It was split into two.
Yes, sir.
One, 1,000 granted effective January 1, 2017, and the other one there was no definite date, but before 2022.
Yes, Your Honor.
So, if that is that confirmed, sir?
That was, I remember that very, very vividly, Your Honor, because at that time it was almost Christmas and the memo finally came out in February. But I understand that there was also lobbying by the former Speaker of the House and members of the House, because it was going to be an election year. They wanted to make sure that it happened, Your Honor.
I guess my only question, Mr. President, is if this memo is really in existence, that would grant an additional 1,000. What will happen to that memo, assuming that it exists? Because I'm sure it exists.
Well,
Is that now overtaken by
yes,
this
Your Honor.
law?
I believe so, Your Honor.
But we would suggest, if that is the intention of the good sponsor, to clearly so state that...
In the law,
in the law.
Yes, sure.
Otherwise, this
suggestion.
memo will carry the mandate.
That's a capital suggestion, Your Honor, to make sure that,
Please,
Your Honor, it is acceptable. Precisely, we made this, Your Honor, because like that time they wanted to give a bonus because it was anticipating the elections. And I'm glad that we're finally doing this so that it will no longer be subject to women caprice or electoral processes, Your Honor.
yeah. In fact, I can see here that on line 18, it is specifically provided that the Commission may determine the grant of a higher benefit allowance, provided that the actuarial soundness of the reserve fund shall be guaranteed. For the record, we'll discover the second 1,000 peso grant.
Yes, Your Honor, obviously.
Yeah, yes.
And I think if we want to add strength to this, it being understood that no more grants may be given after, after the previous grant, Your Honor.
Unless the soundness of the reserve fund is guaranteed.
Yes, sir. By that time, it will be the SSS and the soundness of the actuarial argument will be there, Your Honor.
Yes, all right. But who will issue the guarantee, Mr. President?
That there will be no...
No, that the guarantee that it says on lines 19 and 20, provided that the actuarial soundness of the reserve fund shall be guaranteed. Who guarantees? Who issues the guarantee, or how is the guarantee secured?
Well, the SSS is a chief actuary, Your Honor, and he will be the one to say that it is not feasible, or and of course, that is why you and I agree that, the gentleman and I agree that we should get very, very well-credentialed members of the commission to make sure that they can, as it should be, that the board can actually have the necessary diligence to make sure that the fund is well taken care of. So even if the actuary says that, it should still be the board that will say, no, we cannot afford it. And I suppose that would be our guarantee, Your Honor.
Very good, Mr. President. In fact, one of my proposals that I will make later is that we create the Office of the Actuarial, because there is none right now in the SSS.
I'm told that there is, Your Honor.
There is none.
There is.
Huh? Is there?
Section.
Or
Section C of the Republic Act 8282 as amended, Your Honor.
it says,
The Commission, upon the recommendation of the SSS President, shall appoint an actuary and such other personnel as may be deemed necessary, fix a reasonable compensation, etc.
sir,
Is
I
there an
am
office?
suggesting
An
an
office.
office of the actuary, so that this one would authorize the hiring of the actuarian.
At the moment, Your Honor, there is a group, but I agree with the gentleman. There should be an office,
Yes.
and just to end the agreement between us,
Yeah.
not the debate,
No,
because we
yes,
concur.
Yes, and because I will also suggest that the guarantee be issued by the office of the actuarian.
Yes, Your Honor.
That's why I'm raising that issue. Because right now it is not clear who will guarantee. But if we have
An
the
office.
office of the actuarian, then it is the actuarian who guarantees that indeed there is actuarial soundness even with the grant of the additional benefit.
As the movie The Ten Commandments said, so it is written, so it shall be done, Your Honor.
Mr. President, I recall that in our previous discussion on this, the grant of the 1,000 monthly pension shortened the fund life,
That's
if
right,
I
Your
recall
Honor.
correctly.
That is why we don't want any more additional grants that are recklessly done, Your Honor.
That's right, yeah.
And the original fund life was 2042, or 24 years.
2042.
Yes, Your Honor.
And
And with the 1,000, it will go down to 2032, or 14 years. And another 1,000, resulting in 2,000, will shorten the life to 8 years, Your Honor.
so right now, the fund life is up to 2032.
Yes, Your Honor.
It means that after 2032, unless something is done through these amendments, you can no longer pay the benefits that are presently provided for.
They will go to Don Rodrigo, Your Honor, to save, and the Congress to save the fund, Your Honor.
And I recall that the previous answer was that ideally the fund life should be up to 2060. Is that
Yes,
correct?
Your Honor. That's the ideal, the most ideal. We don't want the Congress having to use taxpayers' money to save the fund.
And how do you, well, just for the record, what are the measures that are being contemplated in order to increase the fund life?
Well, as pointed out, Your Honor, in the law, there will be investments made, subject to, of course, strong scrutiny, that the investments will not end up like the Chucky Arellano type, Your Honor. Not too very long ago. I cite that because that's the most recent exposure to danger and risk by people who are not supposed to be in the board, Your Honor. And of course, at the same time, we have provided that extraordinary diligence of the Board of Directors, the RA 10149, in that Section 19, fiduciary duties of the board and officers as fiduciaries of the state, members of the Board of Directors, trustees, and the officers of GOCCs. I believe this is your creation, Your Honor, have the legal obligation and duty to always act in the best interest of the GOCC with utmost good faith in all its dealings with the property and monies of the GOCC. And as we all know, this law is pervasive in all government corporations, and we should include this as part of the SSS law, Your Honor, such as the members of the board and the GOCC shall act with utmost undivided loyalty to the GOCC, act with due care, extraordinary diligence, skill and good faith in the conduct of the business of the GOCC, avoid conflicts of interest, and declare any interest they may have in any particular matter before the board. I'm told right now that if there's a prospective conflict of interest, they will ask any board member to step out of the room and not be part of this, inhibit himself, apply sound business under D, principles to ensure the financial soundness of the GOCC, and E, elect or employ only officers who are fit and proper to hold such office with due regard to the qualifications, competence, experience, and integrity. And where a member of the board or an officer, or by virtue of the office, acquires or receives for oneself a benefit or profit of whatever kind or nature, including, but not limited to the acquisition of shares in corporations, where the GOCC has an interest, in this particular case, investments of the SSS, using the properties of, let's say, of the SSS for their own benefit, receiving commission on contracts from the SSS, I'm just paraphrasing, Your Honor, assets or taking advantage of corporate opportunities of the SSS, all such profits or benefits shall be subject to restitution under Section 24 of the this Act, without prejudice to any administrative civil or criminal action against members of the Board of Directors, trustees, or officers. Your Honor.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Mr. President, can we be given a copy of the 2017 annual report of the Social Security system? We have access. We went through the website. We have only up to 2016.
I am told, Your Honor, that this is going to come out next month. Right now, what they have is a 2016 annual
Yeah.
report, Your Honor.
It is in the website.
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes. Now,
But they say that they will put it out.
all right. So if we can have a copy of that, not that we will wait for that. On
Yes,
the
Your Honor, of
no,
course.
but we just want to. But we note that in 2016 annual report, the benefit payments amounted to 131.8 billion. Is this
133 billion, Your Honor.
how much?
133 billion.
133 billion. Now, what it was, my notes here says that this is almost a 20% increase in benefits over 2015,
Actually, it's a 28.4% increase, Your Honor.
over 2015.
Yes, Your Honor.
And can we confirm that? Because the annual report for 2016 says only 18.3%.
Ano yung nilagay niyo doon? Your Honor, let me modify my statement earlier. They gave me a later document that includes 2017, that actual payments to the beneficiaries were 170 billion. Yes, sure, 170 billion, which is about almost 30%, about 28.4%, Your Honor.
Yes, so, but this even excludes the 1,000 peso.
That includes the 1,000. That's why it went.
No, sir. Because the 1,000 peso increase in the monthly pension became effective on January 1, 2017.
Kasama na yung 1,000. They're going to die to their last breath, Your Honor. Ready to die to their last breath. They say that this is already includes the 1,000.
The 2016.
2017, Your Honor. This is for 2017.
Yeah, I have no problem. Yes, that's because I'm looking at what is available. This is 2016 annual report. Can we confirm that the benefits granted or benefit payment in 2016 amounted to 131.8 billion? 2016.
Actually, it's 133, Your Honor,
133.
in 2016.
Okay.
And because of the 1,000 additional, it became 170. It became 170, Your Honor. In 2017.
It became 170.
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, with the in
Additional.
2017. And why was there a substantial increase between 2015 and 2016 on the benefit payments?
Is it 2015 and 2017 or
2016, 2015. 2015 was,
Yes, Your Honor.
yeah, and there was a tremendous increase. And that's
There was apparently additional pension to certain personnel when they posted
well,
1985 to 1989
yes.
contributions, Your Honor.
The records, for the record, the increase was due to the pension adjustments of nearly 200,000 pensioners.
Yes, Your Honor.
After a review of the contributions for the period 1985 to 1989,
That is correct.
which required a disbursement of about 10.5 billion.
That is
The
correct.
reason I'm raising this is an adjustment of the pension, of the contributions from 1985 to 1989. Is this a continuing review of the contributions? And will there be additional burden on additional payments for contributions after 1989, and how much?
I am told, Your Honor, that this is finito. This is the last one.
This is, so they have, this is the last?
Yes, Your Honor.
there will
One-time
be-
payment lang yan.
There will be no more
There will not
adjustments?
be.
In other words, the members' contributions after 1989 have all been,
The project has not been
Corrected.
completed, Your Honor.
has been completed? Okay, and there are no more additional payments? For the record?
Except for the 200,000. That continues to receive the adjustment, Your Honor.
Except for the 200,000?
Yes, Your Honor.
There are no other member similarly situated as the 200,000?
No more, Your Honor.
Thank you very much. Now I found the additional 1,000. It is in your annual report. Okay. It says, the adoption of across-the-board benefit increase of 1,000 effective January 2017, with an additional 1,000 benefit increase to be given in 2022 or earlier.
That has already been preempted by, that will be
Yeah.
preempted by the law, Your Honor.
Yes, yes, the once we pass this. But let's clarify that hindi na ibigay yun. Okay. Just one item before we leave this. Now, we notice on page 10, lines 11 to 16, you bracketed the penalty of 3% per month for delinquent employers. Hmm? And instead of a 3% penalty per month, the same would be fixed now by the Social Security Commission.
Yes, Your Honor. They removed it, and what is desired is that it will now up to the commission to determine the penalties, subject to their best judgment, Your Honor.
Mr. President, you know, without casting any aspersion on the commission, you know, when under the proposed measure, they are given the authority to condone penalties arising from non-payment of premiums. So that I would like to believe that it's better that we retain the 3% with that authority that they can condone penalties rather than leave the penalty, remove the 3% per month and leave the discretion to the commission. Baka iba-iba po kahit in good faith babaan nila ang penalty, you know, questions can be raised. May I suggest that we retain the 3% penalty subject, and anyway, there is that provision which allows them to condone the penalty.
The SSS literati behind me, Your Honor, agrees. they think the suggestion is well worth its while because at least they retain the power of condonation and it will be uniform. And I agree with it, Your Honor. I'm just smiling because ang dali naman pumayag nito mga nasa likod ko
Talaga
talaga.
nakikita naman na
Tama, Your Honor.
sila na lang gagawa ng penalty baka kung iba ang mabibenepisyohan ng
That is
penalty.
correct, Your Honor.
Huh? Okay. Now, I notice also, Mr. President, looking at your annual report for 2016, that the net revenues from 2015 to 2016 was reduced substantially by about, was it 9 billion or 8.6 billion? The net revenues really went down. Is this reduction because of the additional benefit that was granted?
Because of the 28% increase in the benefits, Your Honor.
And the 28% increase in the benefit was because of the pension adjustment of about 200 pensioners.
Yes, Your Honor.
Just wanted to place that of record.
That accounted for 33 billion, I'm told, Your Honor.
How much?
33 billion. Kaya every time they move, there is a pinch. That's why they really have to look at the soundness of their moves, Your Honor, supported by the actuarial committee when it is formed.
At this point, can I ask for 1 minute suspension?
Of course, Your Honor.
Session suspended. Session is resumed.
Mr. President, before we suspend, may I just raise a point of clarification? In the interpellation by the good gentleman from Iloilo of the good gentleman from Zambales on the powers and duties of the Social Security Commission, did I actually hear from the lips of the good gentleman from Zambales the term women caprice? Or was I mistaken, Mr. President?
I don't know where you got that.
Oh, I thought I heard it, Mr. President. But if the good gentleman is telling me that I didn't hear such words, I
Whim
am
and
very
caprice, Your Honor.
relieved.
Whim and caprice.
Whim and caprice. Okay, I have no quarrel with that, Mr. President, because really the last time I looked, both whim and caprice didn't have a
I would
sex.
like
So
to
thank you so
inform the
much,
body,
and
Your Honor,
to the
that
good
I'm very
gentleman from
careful with
Zambales.
the distinguished gentle lady that is the protector of womanhood. And all of us here share that wonderful advocacy, Your Honor. And I'm not.
Thank you,
I'm not
Mr.
kidding, Your Honor.
President. I presume we all share that advocacy, and I'm glad to hear it again from the good gentleman from Zambales, even if it means that I stand corrected. Thank you so much.
Thank
Thank
you,
you,
Mr.
Your Honor.
President. Mr. President, I move to suspend consideration of Senate Bill number 1753.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, I move that we resume consideration of Senate Bill 1653 and the committee report number 231. I so move.
Is there any objection? There hearing none, motion is approved.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is the act institutionalizing reforms in the procurement by the distribution utilities and other distribution entities of supply for the captive market. I'd like to recognize Senator Sherwin Gatchalian to sponsor and to interpolate our distinguished Minority Floor Leader, Senator Frank Dillon.
1 minute suspension, sir.
Session
Session
suspended.
suspended.
Can you throw this away? Saan yung notes mo? Ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session is resumed.
Mr. President, will the gentleman yield to a few questions for clarification?
I'll be more than happy to receive some questions or answer some questions, Mr. President.
Mr. President, at the outset, let me place on record that we are fully supportive of this measure, which would, as a concept, require competitive bidding for the procurement by distribution, by the distribution utilities of power, because indeed, as last year there was, or today, it is almost accepted that the Philippine electricity rates is the highest in Southeast Asia. I think part of this is because of the lack of a system to check whether or not the power purchase agreements, which the supply of power to the distributor for ultimate distribution to the customers, are fairly priced. In
Correct,
fact,
Mr. Chairman. Mr. President.
in fact, Mr. President, the reason why I am standing here to endorse this bill is that because the city where I come from is said to have the most expensive electricity in the country. And this is because of the power purchase agreement signed between the power producer in my city and the distributor, where the power purchase agreement included a included a blend of power supply from the coal plant and the diesel plant, and this has resulted in the very expensive cost of electricity. So it is in that sense that I welcome the initiative of the gentleman sponsor to have a system of competitive selection when on the supply to the distribution utilities. It will certainly promote transparency in the sale of electricity between the generation sector and the distribution utilities. Now, and certainly it is our hope that the competitive selection process will translate into cheaper electricity rates for our consumer. I think that's the entire purpose of this measure. Is that correct, sir?
Correct, Mr. President. And Mr. President, just to laymanize the concept of this bill is akin to the Procurement Act of the government, which is being implemented right now. Mm-hmm. It's akin to Republic Act number 9184, or the Government Procurement Reform Act, that all government agencies need to practice. And inside in the practice of that procurement, the government also mandated the different instrumentalities of the government to use an online portal to buy office goods, to buy several goods that they need in their respective offices. So this concept actually is being practiced right now, Mr. President, as well as the online system that the government is using right now. It's also the same in this proposal, Mr. President.
Okay. Now, so that you are with the law on the public sector procurement process, we want to see and have it applicable to procurement in the power sector for the power supply. Is that correct?
Correct, yes, Mr. President. And with the kind indolence of the good minority
just
leader.
Before, yeah, I would like to see, but just a couple of more questions. Isn't there an existing ERC rule on a competitive selection process?
Correct, Mr. President. The ERC promulgated
in 2015, 2015, my note says here.
Correct. In November 6, 2015, a resolution that directs the utilities to conduct a competitive selection process in the procurement of supply of power. However,
Yeah. What happened to that?
it didn't identify the exact methodology of procuring power in that said resolution. So what happened is the utilities were given the leeway, to conduct whatever form of bidding that they wish. And this actually created some confusion in the market because each utility will now have their own modality, will now have their own process to conduct their bidding. So it's not uniform, in other words, Mr. President.
And those shortcomings is so to be corrected and embodied in a law.
Correct. One of the features of the bill, Mr. President, is standardization. So we will standardize the process as well as standardize the forms. And then number two is an online bidding process. So everything will be online and transparent. And number three is transparency, Mr.
So
President.
maybe it's about time if the gentleman can walk us through the principal features of this measure so we can better understand it.
Yes, Mr. President. Let me just pull up slide number 40, Mr. President, and
Yes.
number 40. There. Mr. President, the present setup of our power sector is that the generation goes through the transmission lines and then goes through the distribution utility and then goes through the household. But under the IPIRA, Mr. President, the distribution companies is given the mandate to procure the supply of electricity at the least cost manner. But this manner is not defined, Mr. President, in IPIRA. So what happened is the utilities conduct their own form of bidding or own form of negotiation as long as ERC will approve the final rates of those contracts. The effect of this, Mr. President, if we don't get the best price for that specific contract, as long as it's below the ERC's approved rates, they will be carried and approved and eventually sold to the household, Mr. President. And so if you look at our electricity bill in slide 26, if you look at our electricity bill, Mr. President, 45% of our electricity bill goes to the payment of generation. So these are the contracts that the utilities negotiate in behalf of the customers. Because eventually all of this generation rates will be passed on to the consumers. And if you look at the percentage, Mr. President, it takes up about 45% of our electricity bill. So if we can make the procurement of generation as competitive as possible, then in effect we can reduce the proportion of the generation rates that is being passed on to the consumer, Mr. President.
Just with the permission of the gentleman, I'm just looking at the electric bill, and I noted that the last four items, subsidy, government taxes, universal charges, renewable, all of that are government impositions. Is that correct?
Correct, Mr. President.
And the government impositions is 19%, roughly.
Roughly, Mr. President, correct.
So one of the reasons why mahal ang power din, aside from the generation, the procurement issues, is government impositions.
Correct, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Mr. President, and let me just mention that the good Senate President pro tempore has a bill on reducing universal charges, which takes up approximately 5% of our electricity bill. With the use of the Malampaya Fund, we can virtually eliminate the universal charges that is being passed on to the consumers, Mr. President. So, Mr. President, going back to the bill, if we make the generation charges, generation sector very competitive, we will eventually reduce the proportion of rates being passed on to the consumers, Mr. President. And Mr. President, just I think the most important question is how much can we reduce by doing a competitive bidding in the generation sector, Mr. President. On slide 23, we reviewed approximately 106 power supply agreements for the last 1.5 years, Mr. President. This is prior to the CSP of ERC and post CSP of ERC. Taking note that the CSP of ERC is actually giving the utilities their own ways of conducting bidding. And in our analysis, Mr. President, we can reduce electricity rates by as much as 11%, if we conduct CSP properly, Mr. President. And
Will this bill achieve that or more?
more, Mr. President, because this CSP is actually this CSP did not prescribe a standard way of conducting biddings. No? The utilities were giving their own way of conducting biddings. So one of the key elements here is standardization and also transparency, Mr. President. So this is the minimum that it can achieve, but we feel that we can achieve more than 11% in terms of price reduction, Mr. President. And in slide 27, Mr. President, we use that discount rate to the different sectors. For residential, they can save as much as 70 pesos per month. For the commercial sector, as much as 1,163 pesos per month. And for industrial sector, 40,795 pesos per month, Mr. President. So this is actually quite timely because of the rising inflation and the rising prices of utilities, Mr. President. So in simple terms, Mr. President, we ran the economics, and all sectors will save, especially in the industrial sector, because the industrial sector is also one of the fastest growing sector in our economy, Mr. President.
Mr. President, were the distribution utilities and the power generators invited to the committee hearings?
Yes, Mr. President, they were well represented. PIPA, which is the Association of the Independent Power Producers Group, was invited, and as well as the other stakeholders was invited. This is actually I think we had about two hearings and 3 technical working groups, because we faced a lot of resistance in the bill, and what we did is we took note of those comments, and we made sure that as far as we can accommodate some of their suggestions, Mr. President.
I take note of as far as we can.
As far as we can, Mr. President.
I hope that is not very far.
No, it's not very far, Mr. President. We made sure that the essence of this bill, which is transparency and competition, is well emphasized in this bill.
What about power generators and distribution utilities, which are affiliate of each other, and certainly eyebrows can be raised on the power purchase agreement entered into in terms of it being less than an arm's length transaction to the prejudice of the consumer?
Correct, Mr. President. If we recall, I think the last year, a few of the ERC commissioners were suspended due to the extension of the CSP, mandated CSP. And one of the reasons, Mr. President, is Meralco entered into 6 different power sales agreement, which are affiliated to their own company. These power generators, I think there are 6 generation companies affiliated with Meralco. And this became a controversy because it didn't go into any competitive bidding. It was a bilateral negotiation, and the market were not given, or the different players were not given the opportunity to participate in that endeavor, Mr. President.
Now,
But Mr. President, let me just emphasize, no, out of the 130 plus utilities, no, including electric co-ops and the private utilities, only 2 have big generating affiliates, no, Meralco and Aboitiz. The rest of the generators are independent generators who are ready to compete. No? What they said is if they are given an opportunity to compete, a transparent method and a open and electronic method, they're ready to compete and they're ready to bring down electricity prices as much as they can. So the new players, generators, are very supportive of this bill because it will even the playing field for them, and it will give new entrants a opportunity to supply electricity to the consumers.
thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, can the gentleman sponsor walk us through the proposed process in the purchase of the power needs through the competitive process envisioned under this law?
Yes, Mr. President. We have a slide for that, Mr. President. Slide 2. And this is a typical process, Mr. President. Basically, Mr. President, utilities will submit their annual requirement for their demand. No? And that requirement will now be given to what we call a third-party auctioneer. No?
Third-party?
Auctioneer.
Auctioneer, okay.
Auctioneer. And basically, Mr. President, the third-party auctioneer will be the sole entity to conduct the bidding. No?
Okay.
So if I am a utility, I will now submit to the third-party auctioneer what I need in the next few years.
With the
And the third-party auctioneer now will have that information, and that information will be now posted electronically, giving the generators a chance to bid.
With the permission of the 2 gentlemen.
Yes, Mr.
Is the
President.
third-party auctioneer a government body or a private entity?
It's a private entity, Mr. President, and it will be the third-party auctioneer will be a private entity, and in the first 2 years, it will be the market operator, which is the present PEMC, the Philippine Electricity Market Corporation, which is the entity that runs our wholesale market right now.
Will that be a monopoly?
It will be a monopoly to a sense, but it will be regulated by ERC. So the rates will be regulated by ERC, and it will be supervised by the ERC.
Thank you.
But if the rates, the rates of the auctioneer, what will be regulated by the ERC again?
The ERC will regulate the fees that the auctioneers will charge, and as well as the whole process of the auctioneer, Mr. President. So what this concept aims to eliminate is human intervention in the bidding, Mr. President, because we all know that the bidding can be influenced by human intervention.
So can we walk us through that again? So
yes, Mr. President, if you look at the TPA side, Mr. President, the TPA, the third-party auctioneer, makes the schedule of all CSP. This is electronically. So if you are a generator and you want to supply a utility, you will just go through the internet and you will now know the requirement of all the utilities nationwide. And the utility will now issue an invitation to bid. They will also conduct the pre-qualification, but the number 3, the bidding, will be undertaken by the TPA, the third-party auctioneer, because that is done electronically. And then the determination of winners will be an activity by the utility again.
okay.
So it's the auction portion, the activity of the auction will be done electronically, Mr. President.
All right. Mr. President, can the good sponsor give us an idea, just on percentage, what is the percentage of our present power supply requirements would be covered by long-term power purchase agreements?
Mr. President, on slide 41,
Meron din, ah? O, sige.
meron din, Mr. President.
Sige. You anticipate all our questions, ah? Sige.
But Mr. President, this data came from the WESAM, the wholesale electricity
Yes.
spot market.
Yes.
And currently, the power sales that go through the spot market is about 60%. 84% is bilaterally negotiated, subject to the approval of ERC.
Yes, this 84%
It's a long term.
is covered by power purchase agreements.
Correct, Mr. President. And this is where this bill will come in.
Yes.
To make sure that the 84% undergoes competitive bidding.
This is where the bill will come in.
Correct, Mr. President.
Are we saying therefore that this bill will now amend these existing bilateral agreements so that instead of getting the power supply from the designated power generators, it now will be moved to the open market?
No, Mr. President. The 84, it's prospective.
Perspective.
The
new
it's
ones.
prospective, Mr.
So-
President.
So,
The
new ones.
The new ones, Mr. President. The new ones.
So the effect of this is, baka po, apo na ako sa tuhod hindi pa effective ito. Hindi naman.
Di naman, Mr. President. We consulted with PEMC, the Philippine Electricity Market Corporation, which is currently our spot market operator.
Yes.
And we consulted with them, and because this is done electronically, it can be rolled out quite quickly, Mr. President.
No, what I'm saying is, the 84% cannot, from what I understand from the good sponsor, 84% cannot be covered because there is no competitive selection process, since the 84% are already in place.
Bilateral agreement.
Correct.
Bilateral agreements. That's
Correct, Mr. President. The 84%, the process here is they will have, some of them are interim approvals or provisional approvals,
Yes.
but they will have to go through the rate-making powers of the ERC, meaning ERC should approve them.
If this law becomes effective, will there be a favorable changes in the mix of what is in the spot market and what is bilateral?
Mr. President, the
Future
ratio
bilateral.
between the spot and bilateral
Yeah.
is given to the utilities, because the utilities know their requirement. No?
Yes,
And
I know, yeah.
And we have given the power to the DOE to make sure that there will be no more bilateral negotiations.
Yes,
Everything
but
will
the
now have-
existing 84% covered by bilaterals will continue.
will continue, Mr. President,
Right.
because
And
some of them have
usually,
already.
since this is a long-term supply agreement,
Yeah.
Yes, Mr. President.
With the permission,
Yes.
just two questions on the bilateral. How many percent of the 84 is still subject to the ERC right now? Yung mga provisional lang.
All of it, Mr. President.
All 84%? Walang final lahat yan?
Wala pa, Mr. President, because ERC right now is, as we read in the papers, is really under a lot of.
So none of the contracts have been approved by the ERC?
Mr. President, I don't have the exact
Yeah, okay.
number, but a lot of it, I would assume majority of
Of
it
the 84%?
are under provisional approval.
So nothing final?
May mga final naman, Mr. President, but we don't. We can supply you with the exact
Okay.
numbers.
Okay, it'll be interesting to look into. And then one last question. Is it correct to state also that 16%, the one in the spot market, is our surplus?
The one in the spot market are typically the peaking requirement, Mr. President.
Correct.
So sometimes they will need more power, so they
Yeah.
will buy through the spot
Yeah,
spot
but in
market.
effect, that's your excess capacity, right?
That is your more or less peak requirement. No?
Yeah, you know, so.
But Mr. President, I've also encountered some utilities that they intentionally buy some of the requirement from the spot market because it's cheaper right now.
Depending on the
Situation.
right?
Correct, Mr. President. So, but typically, it's the peak and the mid-merit
Yes,
curves
yes.
of the demand.
Yes. Thank you.
Yes, looking at this and following up on the questions of the presiding officer, is it correct to say that the bilaterals are long-term?
Yes, Mr. President.
And the long-term is about, what, 25 years?
Maximum of 25 years, Mr. President, I understand, and maybe on average about 10 years, Mr. President.
On the average, about 10 years.
Yes,
So
Mr. President.
are we saying that the benefits of this bill will be felt 10 years from now?
Mr. President,
the new ones.
Huh?
the
Yeah, but I'm just talking about the 84, which, you know, are existing today.
correct. Mr. President, some of the contracts will be expiring as we go along, and the demand of the country will also grow. It's growing about 4 to 5%. So new demand plus expiring contracts will now
yes.
have to undergo CSP.
Yes. I assume the reason why you said that the 84% covered by bilateral agreements could not be touched is because of that constitutional prohibition against impairment of obligations in contracts.
Correct.
Is that
Mis-
correct?
Correct, Mr. President. But the Senate Pro Tempore made a good point on some of the contracts are provisionally approved, no? And we would have to look at the legalities, whether those contracts should undergo or can undergo CSP if this bill is approved.
Because I am even going one step further, and maybe the good sponsor can study whether we can validly make this review of the bilaterals an exception to the constitutional prohibition against impairment of obligations and contracts. Because this can be justified as an exercise of police power of the state to make, to make this law applicable to existing bilaterals, and because it can be argued that the police power of the state is superior to obligations under contracts. There are certain cases which would sustain that rule. So maybe, I am not so certain myself, but because I've not studied it, I'm just from what I have learned in my in law, that the impairment, the prohibition against impairment of obligations on of contracts is not absolute. There can be exceptions, among which is the exercise of the police power of the state for the benefit of its people. And certainly, I would like to think that this is worth studying, whether in fact we can make this fall under the exception and make, in effect, make the bilaterals subjected to competitive bidding.
Mr. President, we'll study the suggestions of the good minority floor leader. Definitely, in my opinion, if these 84% bilaterally negotiated contracts are subjected to a competitive selection process, which is transparent and fair, I am quite certain that those contracts, the prices of those contracts can be lowered further, Mr.
Yeah,
President.
because, well, you know, I don't, they are bilaterals, and I seriously doubt whether they have undergone any competitive
Correct,
process.
Mr. President.
I doubt that very much.
Or at the very least, those that have not yet been finally approved by the ERC, if not all.
Yes, should be subject to this bill.
Yes.
Yes, well, okay, that's worth also a consideration of the sponsor. If we cannot make a blanket a retroactive application, maybe those those
Provisionally approved.
power purchase agreements which are still pending approval.
Pending.
Yeah,
Approval.
provisional approval.
Provisional.
Yeah.
Yes, Mr. President, we have a gentleman from ERC right now, and I told him to give us the number of contracts which are provisionally approved, and we will study the concept of before finally approving those contracts, maybe we can mandate those utilities to conduct a competitive selection process. Mr.
The reason I'm so interested in this is because my people in my city is affected by this very high blend of source of power, and it is affecting our ability to generate economic activities. And ultimately, the people will suffer, and this is because of a power purchase agreement, which is, if I recall correctly, 20 years in duration.
Correct, Mr. President.
And anyway,
Mr. President, I just want to share a slide, slide 20. And these are some of the countries, Mr. President, that conducts a centralized auction system, Mr. President. Some of the countries, a lot of the countries actually are in Latin America. We have Mexico, Brazil, Spain, Panama, and a multitude of other countries, Mr. President, that has some form of centralized and standardized auctioning system, Mr. President.
Mr. President, in order to facilitate the approval of this measure, at this stage on my part, we would already terminate our interpellation. We would just reserve our right to ask questions when the amendments are introduced, so that we can fast track the process. It's a good measure, Mr. President. Maybe just tweaking or refining certain provisions, certain unclear provisions of the law.
Correct, Mr. President.
That is why I would manifest that we would terminate our interpellation at this point and just reserve our right to ask questions when the amendments are introduced.
We would definitely welcome the suggestions and the refinements in the bill, Mr. President, so that it will be much clearer and much clearer to the implementing bodies, Mr. President.
Just one last query from the gentleman, the sponsor of this measure, which is a very good measure. If you were to subject all of this to public bidding, what is the estimate of the gentleman that you could reduce the price of electricity?
We conducted our own estimates, Mr. President, and in slide 23, after reviewing 106 different power supply agreements, we can reduce about approximately 11%
Of the generation.
of the generation charge,
So
Mr.
about
President.
50 centavos.
Correct, Mr. President. And let me just share with you another study. This is conducted by Professor Del Mundo of UP in slide 22. In his study, Mr. President, by aggregating the electric cooperatives and also subjecting them to CSP or to a competitive selection process, you can save as much as 35% of the generation charge, Mr. President. And this is conducted by an independent study by Professor Del Mundo in 2007, Mr.
When you
President.
say aggregating, you mean parang there's a board, yung parang stock market.
No, Mr. President, the utilities will aggregate themselves. No?
Okay, got it.
So, si Professor Del Mundo at that time,
So volume.
correct, acted as an aggregator.
Yeah.
So, he aggregated, I think about, ilang EC siya?
So volume purchaser.
Right here. In Central Luzon, he aggregated 11 electric cooperatives, and it yielded up to 32% decrease in the electricity price, Mr. President.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Okay, thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, we suspend consideration for the meantime the bill, as Senator Villar also had manifested that she would like to interpolate the good sponsor. So for the meantime, we suspend consideration on Senate Bill number 1653. I so move, Mr.
Is
President.
there any objection? There, Chair hearing none, motion's approved.
Mr. President, I'd like to resume consideration on Senate Bill number 1271. This is the discrimination, prohibiting the discrimination basis of sexual orientation, gender identity, or expression, and recognize the resume consideration, Mr. President. I so move.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion's approved.
The status, the parliamentary status of the measures were in the period of interpellation. I believe that the chairperson would like to make, or the sponsor would like to make a manifestation. I would like to recognize Senator Risa Ontiveros.
Senator Risa is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President, at salamat din sa Majority Leader. Mr. President, we do have two more colleagues here in the Senate who are scheduled to interpellate, and I look forward to their interpellations next week before we adjourn. I just sought the permission of the Majority Leader to make a brief manifestation today. Mr. President, I filed this bill, the Anti-Discrimination Bill, last August 1, 2016. 2 taon at 1 linggo na po ngayong araw. This was eventually this became committee report number 17, and we are presently also debating in plenary committee reports numbering in the 400s. Mula pong sponsor ko ito noong December 14, 2016, the bill has been in the period of interpellation for 602 calendar days. So halos talaga 2 taon na, Mr. President. It has been scheduled for interpellation 25 times, 6 times of which, or just 1/4 of the time, na aktwal na natuloy po yung interpellation. And our very first interpellators in our chamber, Mr. President, were Senators De Lima and Cayetano. Yung isa po ay nasa kulungan ngayon, yung isa ay kalihim na. So nagbago na ang mundo natin dito sa Senado, pero nasa 2nd taon na ng interpellation ng Anti-Discrimination Bill. I wish to reiterate, Mr. President, that I look forward with hope and confidence dun sa last 2 interpellations ng ating mga kasama dito sa Senado next week before we adjourn. And also in the spirit of what our Finance Committee Chair, Senator Legarda, expressed, the hope that we can bring this anti-discrimination bill to consideration for approval on second reading bago po tayo mag-adjourn at bago po natin ipagpatuloy, pasukan ng buong buo yung budget debates po natin, Mr. President.
Mr.
Thank you so much.
I hope this bill will not be discriminated on.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. That is my continuing hope, and I hope that hope will bear good fruit next week. Thank you, Mr.
Thank
President.
you. Senator Legarda is recognized.
Yes. I would like to associate myself, Mr. President, with the thoughts and the emotions and the passion and the direction that our good Congresswoman, Senator Risa Ontiveros was speaking about on the anti-discrimination bill. I think it was in my first or second term, perhaps, that I first filed the anti-discrimination measure. It may not have included the SOGI, but it was anti-discrimination of certain sectors. And at that time, it was Senator Santiago who introduced an amendment to introduce the SOGI version, but it did not prosper. I hope that before we deliberate on the budget, since it's a measure that has been passed in the House, yes, we can have a version that will be acceptable to all beliefs, to all faiths, to all sectors. I believe even the church has studied this and have their views favorable to a certain version of the SOGI bill. Of course, it may not be the way it was initially filed, but as we know, any form of legislation has amendments and we can discuss this. But it would be a great legacy of this chamber if we are able to pass the anti-discrimination measure during our watch. Thank you, Mr. President. I just want to give my full, unequivocal, urgent support to this measure. Thank you, Mr. President.
And for the record, I also associate myself with the statements made by Senator Legarda.
Thank you.
Very good.
Mr. President, I'd like
Me
to also
too, me
place...
too. The same. we associate ourselves with the views of Senator Legarda and the author of the measure.
Yes, Mr. President, I'd like to also place on record that if there was a vote on the measure today, I would vote favorably for the SOGI bill. Fortunately, we still have two colleagues of ours who really want to interpolate. I commit to the good sponsors, Senator Risa and Senator Lauren, that will place this on the calendar and the agenda every day so that we can tackle this anytime in the next few weeks. So with that, Mr. President, I move that we suspend consideration on Senate Bill 1271.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, I move that we adjourn session until 3 o'clock of Monday afternoon, August 13, 2018. I so move.
Session is adjourned.